7 o'clock. I am going to call this meeting to order. Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Here.
Mrs. Engel,
Here.
Mr. Malone, Mr. Marshall,
Here.
Mrs. McGrattan. I thought I saw her here.
Here.
There you are. Okay. Mr. Sebelia,
Here.
Mr. Soms,
Here.
Mr. Washington.
Here.
8 here, 1 absent.
At this time, we'll ask Mr. Juskiewicz, from the chair of the Permanent Municipal Building Committee, to give his presentation. Good to see you again, Steve.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
And thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Chairman Davis, for this opportunity to talk to the town council. I'm probably way overdue for giving you a face-to-face update. I think the last time that I spoke to you in person was actually when we were getting ready to do the track and field project. So, but I'm glad I have an opportunity today. I'll try not to take too much time, but I want to make sure I answer any questions that you have. I believe online tonight also is the superintendent of schools and Wayne Donaldson, the director of facilities for and grounds for the schools. So at one point in our presentation, I'm going to stop and let Marcia Hancock, town finance director, speak a little bit because there's some elements that are outside the purview of the PMBC that are handled by the town through the mayor's office and finance. Essentially, you know, we don't figure out how to pay the bills at the PMBC. We just figure out how to execute the project. So I prepared some slides. I'll try to pause at key points so that I can take any questions. So first of all, committee membership, I just want to remind you who the committee is. Steve Shuttleworth just recently in the last week has indicated that he is resigning because he's moving out of town. So I'll be needing a relief for him as a regular member. And then the way the charter is written, we receive 2 temporary members that are project specific. So we've had Kate Palmer-Herb for quite some time. However, when Bob Guerrero resigned, we still have a vacancy there. So I'm 2 down right now. So I look forward to those positions being filled. I do want to point out that myself, Pete, and Jerry have been on the committee. I think we were trying to figure it out. I think it's been about 9 years now since inception. So they're longstanding members, and it's good to have a team of professionals. The other thing I want to point out that not here on the committee, but attending our meetings quite frequently, other key members, specifically, I want to mention the superintendent of schools and really Wayne Donaldson, who is as much a committee member of anyone else. He attends every one of our meetings, and we have a lot of communication. And with the construct that we have, he spends an awful lot of time on this project. So my hat's off to him. So next slide, please. All right, we're going to talk tonight only about 2 large projects. We do a bunch of smaller projects, but I want to focus on these 2 big ticket items, the school improvement project for Gallup Hill School and the middle school. And then lastly, the high school track and field project, because I have some questions for the town council about moving forward with some enhancements with the money that we did not spend because we really didn't use, we used about $7,000 of contingency money during the project with our HI Stone, our main contractor. So there's some things that we think need to still be done, but we want to get your concurrence. All right, so if you move on to the next slide, please. Just a reminder that the Ledyard School Improvement Project was renovations and expansions to 2 schools, the Gallup Hill School and the Ledyard Middle School, built in 1965 and 1970. And you'll see these overhead shots of kind of how things looked to be, prior to the projects. And we're going to talk about each of those buildings and some of the factors that are involved. All right, so looking at our 2015 referendum that the town passed overwhelmingly, the referendum was $65.8 million, and then it was broken into sub-projects. The state considers the middle school and the Gallup Hill School as totally separate projects. They're in no way connected whatsoever at the state level, except that we had 1 referendum. So our town referendum ties them together, and it also gave the town council the authority to modify those projects and move money between them as they saw fit without going back to referendum. Marcia Hancock can talk some more about that as we move forward. But these were the target numbers. You'll see 35.6 million at Ledyard Middle and Gallup Hill at 28.6 million. So please move on. All right, in case you forgot what it kind of looked like before, Ledyard Middle School, and then if you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of where things are from a more recent shot. The next slide, which will bring up how things kind of look today. Now, granted, it's a sunnier day and the grass is a little greener, so that makes a difference. But I just want to point out some things that are kind of significant. I got a lot of calls. You'll see the geese that are out there on the left-hand side of the picture. I get a lot of calls about, hey, why didn't we fix that field that floods all the time? We did spend a little bit of money to research into what could be done to stop that field from flooding. And the estimates we got back, assuming we could get the environmental permits to do it, because it required significantly large underground storage tanks for the water that would drain to there. Just to give you an update, all of the surface water and all the parking lots that are on the eastern side of the shot that you see here, the picture, all drain down into that field. So it's there, it's by design. The cost estimates were between $800,000 and $1 million to fix the field drainage problem there. Discussion with people realized we could buy some property somewhere else in town and set up a field there much cheaper than doing that. You'll also see that that parking lot has been completely renovated there with storm drains, proper lighting, sidewalk and things, and not to mention the beautiful school in the background. All right, next slide. The Gallup Hill School, the kind of the quarter looking at Town Farm Road and Gallup Hill Road. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see we did remove some trees there to put in a parking lot. You'll see the partial stone wall that was put in late in the project as we made sure we had sufficient funds. We had a lot of concerns about cost throughout this project. It was important. You go to the next slide. I wanted to talk to you for a minute about cost because when we were doing these projects at the beginning, there was a lot of people and some folks that are on the council still today that were concerned that we were spending way too much money. Some folks that are no longer on the council, but and taxpayers that, hey, we're building Taj Mahals and we're spending way too much money. I'm doing a comparison here to another middle school. I picked Branford Middle School because it was built in '72, and the quote in red there was directly from the town of Branford that was saying, hey, it was the open school style with classrooms with no walls and things like that. It was the trendy thing to do in the 1970s. Ledyard agreed to it back then, and we built a school with no walls and all the problems associated with that. But if you take a look here, granted the Branford school was much larger. It was almost twice the size, but when it gets right down to it, I wanted to do a comparison here because it was a renovation of a similar type building. Our cost per square foot and cost per student came in at about 30% less per student and 28% less per square foot. Now, this is based on what was submitted to the state for approval on the school priority list from 2017, which is when we were approved. If you recall, we were originally on the 2016 state priority list. However, we were taken off by the administration because they felt our project wasn't shovel ready. And if you recall, we went back to the state and said, hey, we're not shovel ready. We're handing out the shovels. So you should really, we should have been on the list in 2017. We weren't. We made it in 2017. And it was because the town council agreed to go forward at risk with the project that we were able to keep our costs down. So you'll see here of note, look at the top there. Branford's reimbursement rate for this was expected to be about 35%. So it was much, much lower than Ledyard's. Granted, Branford may want to spend more money on their schools, but you'll see here, when it comes to cost per square foot and cost per student, we spend a lot less money. So next slide, a little closer to home. Here's, this is a Gallup Hill School cost comparison. The reimbursement rate matters. We have about a 62.8% reimbursement rate. If you look at Groton, they're expecting an 80% reimbursement rate on their schools because they're dealing with a racial balancing across their schools. Their solution was, hey, build one middle school, renovate our elementary schools. Now, granted, one of these two projects became radically different after it was sent to the state, but this is a pretty darn close comparison. The amount of square footage of the schools, they were 80,500 square feet. We were 80,088. 604 students versus 639 students. The age of the buildings was about the same. This is a really good comparison. But if you take a look here, you'll see that the Groton projects were submitted to the state at an average of about $580 a square foot. where the Ledyard project went in at 357. And by the way, we did better than that in the end because we did not spend all the money in the project in construction. So I think that if you take a snapshot at this, no one can come out and say that Ledyard was not cost concern as we went through this project. You'll see on the yellow box in the middle, 43% less per student. That's a lot of money. And these are elementary schools that are being converted from a middle school. Next slide, please. And they were, by the way, both renovated as new projects. All three of those projects were. So taking a look here at Ledyard Middle School, you'll see at the top there, the size of the renovations versus new construction. We kind of had a curveball thrown to us by the state early in the project where we weren't allowed to tear down as much of the old building as we thought. And that created some redesign issues as we got started. But I just want to show you the pre-construction estimate that we started with just before we broke ground and where we wind up final. I won't read all the numbers to you, but I want to point out a few caveats. And I feel bad that I have like 6 different notes at the bottom here for you to look at with asterisks, single, double, and triple. But those bottom numbers, I just want to let you know that I have removed all of the financing and bond costs from these numbers. And you can see the numbers there so you can roll them back in. And I also have not included the recent town council action from about 2-3 weeks ago, where you reduce the funding in these projects to move that over into the financing section. But in this particular case, when we started the project, our estimated finance costs were about $400,000 for the middle school. As you'll see when Marcia Hancock shows you, for a variety of reasons, those short-term costs are much higher than we expected. And there's many ways of financing the project, borrowing more money up front, less money up front. I'll leave that to town finance. But the big thing I want to point you out here is even if we had, looking at the numbers we're coming out of here without the finance costs, we have about a $1.5 million surplus in the middle school. And again, our initial, we were looking at about $400,000 finance to start. So in reality, we finished up more than $1 million under budget for the portion of the project that we were responsible for. I do want to point out that the soft cost numbers, it looks like that's where most of the savings were. Embedded in the soft cost is the owner construction and abatement contingency money. And that is where we really saved the money, was in the fact that we didn't have to dip into contingency a lot, because while we found a lot of unknowns when you start tearing into walls and things don't always go as you plan when you're renovating a 40-year-old building while you're trying to live in half of it. But in this particular case, those soft costs cost us a lot less, and it allowed us to do some things in the project that we weren't sure we were going to be able to afford at the beginning, putting in more resilient flooring that requires less maintenance, for example, in some places, replacing bituminous walkways with concrete that have a longer life and less maintenance and things. So we were able to do some things and we still came in under budget. I'll move on to the Gallup Hill School numbers. Gallup Hill, a little bit of a smaller, but you'll see here that renovation and new construction were about 50-50 on the project. You'll again see here pre-construction versus projected final costs. We had a estimated about $300,000 in finance and bond costs going into this project. I've done the same thing, backed those numbers out, as well as I have not reflected your town council action. But the fact is, even with that estimated bonding cost at the beginning, we were still close to $700,000 under budget. And at the Gallup Hill School, there were several things that we wound up doing in that project that were things like concrete and things that were done differently, that we put in a second playground at a request from the school. We did work in adding in some what the school refers to as I believe safe rooms is the correct criteria. There may be a more technical term where students can be placed in a safe area while if they're having any issues that day. Quite a few things that were done that weren't discovered until the project got started. So if you'll move on to the next, just quickly on the way forward, and I'll talk, I do know that somebody has some questions about some punch list items. So I prepared some information in addition to this slide. So one of the things I want to point out here is that we've been in some of the parts of these buildings for well over 2 years. Normally there were some delays well, substantial completion occurred in April of 2019 from a contractual standpoint. What that means is that the buildings can be used for their intended purpose. There can still be plenty of stuff that needs to be done, but they're satisfied that we can get occupancy and we can get into the building. There was a lot of grounds work that had to be done after that because of the time of year. We did bring some additional work into the project along the way at the end there in 2019. Of course, when COVID hit, it got really, really hard for two reasons. While we could get easier into the building, getting trades in to fix items became much, much, much more difficult. In some cases, people had stopped working. There were issues in construction, but we continue to this day to resolve some of those issues and warranty items. Because when you buy a building, you get a lot of equipment, and that equipment has warranties. In the middle school, we did manage to roll into what we call the final construction invoice in December of 2020. That's important because we need to move forward now with a process that the Board of Ed does, working with Wayne Donaldson to get, there's some forms called ED 409 forms that have to be submitted to start the state closeout process. And again, punch list items, I'm showing $35,000 here on the slides. I got an update yesterday from ONG, who is our construction manager at risk. The estimated value right now on the punch list items are about $17,000. So we're talking about, way less than 1/10 of 1% of the project here. And there's 20 items that are on that list from 7 different vendors, the one that they forwarded me today. And they range from things like a hard hat that's been stuck on the ceiling of a tech ed room. Well, they got to get a man lift into that room to get it out of there. But to carpet being cut short, there's issues with paint. We've just recently received an extended multi-year warranty on paint from the paint vendor that's going to come in and deal with that for us. Having some problems with ceiling tiles in places, but I don't want to get into all the items on here, but some of them are very, very annoying, and others are issues that we continue to address. And I'll talk about Gallup Hill here in a second. So moving back into the Gallup Hill School in the slide, we spent a tremendous amount of time in the Gallup Hill School over the last year chasing HVAC issues. When we started this project, we were told that the #1 issue we were going to have in a building was going to be related to HVAC, and that was surely the case. Not a day went by where Wayne Donaldson and I did not share an email as he kept me in the loop on issues with HVAC, some of which were, they were all related to the HVAC vendor, but some were control related, some were physical equipment related. And either way, it was all still that vendor's responsibility. Only in the last few months after we brought in with ONG's assistance, we brought in a third party. We did discover that there were 2 dampers that were never installed that were supposed to be installed in one of the areas of the building. And as a result of that, that was causing cascading effects along with some other problems as to why we had a problem with one part of the building maintaining temperature. Our last discussions at our last meeting with Mr. Donaldson indicated that those issues are essentially resolved now. We still have some issues with some equipment that has failed, but we're working through that. That's warranty work, and we'll continue to do that. I do expect that sometime in April, we'll get the final construction invoice and we can get started in the process of closing that out with the state. It's a tough thing because we want to push to get these projects closed out because there is cost associated with holding off on closing them out. And the state during the project, when we started this thing way back in 2016, it was a 5% retention by the state. They increased that to 11% once we got the project started, and there was no grandfathering. We will move into the audit with the state, and based on what we were told by our architect, Silva Petroselli, and our construction manager at risk, ONG, we can expect that to be complete somewhere between 6 months and 6 years before the state will complete the audit, and there's not much that we can do. We're also subject to the state's review of all change orders, and even if a change order is for something that the fire marshal asked for, that is code related, whatever it may be, the state still reserves the right to turn down any change order whatsoever. So let me go back to Gallup Hill and punch list for a minute. The Gallup Hill punch list is much, much more extensive. I did get an update on that again yesterday. That punch list had 165 items on it. However, 32 of those are considered closed and need to be checked. But 95 of the 165 are related to doors. And doors have been a problem. These are mostly classroom doors, although some of them are other doors. With dealing with door hold opens and things like that. Early in the project, we had a lot of I'm not going to say disagreement, but as to which doors would be able to be held open. There are some fire code type things, there's security things related to doors, and sometimes those two things don't go together. There are school preferences for doors, and we've looked at replacing components in those doors that are designed to hold them open, and we continue to chase that, and that has been a big problem for the school, and we understand that. There's about 38 to 40 other items on that list. 12 vendors are involved. And again, a lot of door work, missing caulk in places. Some of them are of a tile pattern of the flooring tile is not in the correct pattern. Weather stripping issues. We have rust on some steel that's not properly preserved. It's now dripping rust on other areas. It's unsightly. And we have issues with some locks in some places where the keys were not the right series for some locks and other things. And of course, we develop roof leaks that are covered under warranty. But once you have a roof leak, you have to deal with the ceiling tile and anything else that it leaked on. So because we've took so long to close these projects out, things continue to rear their ugly head, and Mr. Donaldson chases them quite often. And this has taken too long. COVID did not help things at all whatsoever. I would have hoped that we would be closed out of this project probably close to a year ago. All right. So with, I'd like to stop there, answer any questions before Marcia speaks about the next two slides, if there are any. I estimate, just doing a quick review of the punch list at the Ledyard, the Gallup Hill School, that we're probably in the neighborhood of about $80,000 at the most. Again, warranty work doesn't count into that. I think that number will actually be less than that because in some case, but we have not made final payments even close on the Gallup Hill School yet. There's still invoicing coming. So with that, I'll answer any questions from anyone that has anything before I turn over to Marcia for a few slides.
Do any town councilors have any questions for Mr. Juskiewicz? I will watch for hands. Mr. Soms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, I want to acknowledge some points that you made and some points that we know. These two projects had their challenges, which were not insignificant. The first one being co-location and occupancy. You've got to rebuild a building with students in it. That's no small challenge. Also, because its renovation is new, you always run into challenges and surprises when you rebuild a building. Then COVID happened. That didn't make things easy. And it's not just that we had COVID, it's that it's hard to find personnel who can and are willing and able to work, as well as volunteers. And I also want to comment, there's been a lot of talk, and I want to talk about punch lists too, but I want to make clear that all projects have punch lists, whether they're buildings, whether they're software installations or technical projects. Everybody has a project list or a punch list at the end of the project. And I also want to acknowledge that this team, your team, are volunteers, and that you spent many long, late nights doing this work. That brings me to my question. I am deeply concerned about the amount of extra financing charges that we incurred. I've heard your original estimate was $400,000. I heard another estimate that was lower than that. And at the last council meeting, we had to pass a motion to pay $2 million in unanticipated financing charges. Now, I know we could dispute whether they were anticipated, so I'm going to come to the point. The point is the project took far longer than it was expected to take by multiple years, multiples of the number of years originally projected. And in 2018, I had a conversation with you about O&G recommending that they do the project management, and we would not need an independent clerk of the works or project manager to oversee the project. Given the long hours that you guys put into this and the amount of time that the PMBC had to spend, and given the length of the punch list and the duration of the delays, how would you answer that question tonight? Would you do that again?
Yeah, let me address a couple things. Number one, you have to remember that when you talked about moving money into debt, that you started out with zero when you got to $2 million because the original figures that were given to us between the two schools were probably in the $700,000 range. So you'd have to subtract that first. The other item is that those numbers were very, very low and going into that part of the project. I estimate that the earliest that we could have gone to closeout would have been about 1 year ago from today, talking to architects and others as to how long things normally take to get to project closeout, to where you have all the final invoices and things paid. And they generally say that's about 1 year for a project of this magnitude and scale, about 1 year after you're essentially done with the work. So as we added things into the project in the summer of 2019 at the understanding of what was needed by the Board of Ed while we had mobilization that was there, I'm going to estimate that the earliest we could have finished up would have been about 1 year ago. So how the town was planning to bond at, when would things go to bonding, what would be paid for with short-term debt, those types of things are outside the purview of the PBMC. Luckily, we were able to complete the project where there was sufficient funds in there to be able to pay those debt costs. Back to your question, Councilor Solms, on the decision. At the beginning of this project, going back prior to that question that you had asked, it's not about a clerk of the works so much. It has to do with the having a rep from the town that is available to work with these things more closely. The PBMC authorized, the PMBC authorized and transferred money to the Board of Ed to pay for at the time, Mr. Kilpatrick this is Sam Kilpatrick, I was mixed up which one's which, the third, I think, who was the director of facilities at the time. In a discussion with the Board of Ed, we authorized additional money to purchase by the labor for an assistant who was hired, and that freed up Mr. Kilpatrick to spend a lot more time on the project. We never rescinded that authority for the money. However, that individual that was hired eventually left and was never replaced. And that person was not a PMBC employee, that person was a Board of Ed employee. If that position had been filled, would we have probably had fewer problems? Absolutely, yes. Another curveball that kind of got thrown to us during this was a three-part curveball. Not only did Mr. Kilpatrick leave and then Mr. Donaldson came in, he's doing a great job, but he didn't have the knowledge of this particular project and what agreements had been made up to that point. So granted, he came up to speed at full speed, but we did change out our end of the personnel, and we never hired the second person again. Second thing that happened is Silver Petrosilli changed out the lead architect project manager, and then O&G changed out their project management team. So all those things together kind of create a little bit of a tsunami. So I disagree when you say that the projects took 2 years longer than they should have. Substantial completion does not mean that the project is ready to be closed out. That just means that you can start using the building for what it was designed for. The absolute earliest that we would have probably looked to close out the project would have been in January of 2020 and moving forward with the state. Now, I will point out one other thing is, depending on when we bond, if we had bonded this whole project at the beginning back in, say, 2017, our interest rate would have probably been significantly higher, and the cost of a town for the overall project would probably have cost us more than any additional short-term borrowing costs are related to the debt. And I don't know if that answered your question or not. So at this point, I think we.
So I'd just like to comment, Steve. I understand if we take the finance charges, take those out of the equation, we could argue those forever. If we take the duration of the project out, we could argue that forever. But I think we all have to admit we've got some serious punch list issues that have gone on for far too long that have been reported to the town council by our representative who sat in on many of the meetings. And again, the question is, yeah, you can point to other people and people who came and went, including project managers hired by O&G. But the fact is, and my question is, I believed at the time and I believe now that an independent professional who is hired to oversee the town's interests is a better way to go.
Perhaps that would be, and we can look at doing that in a future project. I don't think that having a a clerk, another town person can change O&G's relationship with, if you're talking about not using a construction manager at risk, we could have gone with that and gone with a straight general contractor. The advice we got from the state was that and from the architects, and the architect doesn't really have they don't have a dog in that fight, where that your costs, because all the risk is being absorbed by the general contractor, but your overall contract price would be 10% higher. So I can't go back and speculate with that. However, there are things that have been on the punch list for way too long, but when you're missing screws in places and things, I don't consider those to be, they're a pain and they're a nuisance. I look at the total dollar value when I look at what is significant and what is not. But again, I roger your concerns, and these are issues that have taken too long to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solms. Any other town councilors have any questions? Hearing none, is Marcia Hancock, I believe. Mr. Juskiewicz, is that what you're planning?
I just wanted to mention one other thing, that in the reports, the early report on punch list items, and I'm going to go back because I know that Councilor Marshall attends our meetings and he is a professional in the industry, so he understands and often offers very, very good information on suggestions on how to handle some of the issues we're dealing with. For a while, the punch list, as we were calling it, included items that were not truly punch list items. They were items that were added, that were still going through change orders. They were just the general list of things that needed to be done. So some of those items were not truly punch list items, or they were warranty items. If a sink that's installed, that's been accepted, and you're using it for a year fails, that becomes a warranty item. That's not a punch list item. And we needed to make sure that that terminology was being used correctly. Warranty items are expected to be handled through the warranty and not the punch list process. So I just wanted to address that.
Understood, but major issues like roofs leaking and causing wood floors to curl and buckle. I mean, those are major issues. Whether the punch list items or not doesn't matter to me. It sounded to me all along that we had a problem managing this contractor.
I will tell you that it did not go smoothly at times, and we ran into issues. And again, I can't compare it to other projects because this was the first, the police station project we compare it to, and this was 10 times the magnitude of that.
Yeah, agreed.
That's definitely a good discussion for any future projects as to the extent that you need. But again, keep in mind that a town person that we hire, a clerk of the works or whoever that person may be, does not situate themselves between the construction manager at risk and the vendors, because remember that the individual contracts with the trades are between O&G and the trade, not between the town and the trade.
Understood. Yep.
And I think I see a hand up on Councilor.
Mr. Washington.
I just want to add in something really quick. Having the luxury right now working for the state of Connecticut, and what we're doing is I oversee the rebuilding of train stations, very large maintenance facilities and the like, done a lot of these buildings, and the HVAC, it's always a problem. The closeout, and I think when you think of this project, the problem, why it takes so long in this process, it's different than a road job. It's different than a bridge job. I've done $30 million bridges. They're easier than dealing with a $13 million building. And the reason for that is primarily that, as was being referenced, is that there's so many trades involved and so many moving parts at any given time. If you blink, it's a problem that someone's going to build something in the wrong place. Something's going to get overlooked. One thing I would always recommend is to have a third party watching, but that comes at a cost. It's a cost, and this may not sound nice, but it's a cat and mouse game in construction. Catch me if you can. When you do these buildings, there's so many parts where you could hide stuff, which if you think about it, when you look at the old building, we had the plans for the old building, yet we found stuff that didn't show up in the plans. And that's just kind of par for the course. And you kind of do a little bit stuff on the fly, but it's really paramount that you have multiple, at $35 million for work. You look at the building costs across the group, it's a certain percentage of that should always be tied into having an outside third party look at it. And that's only because they're dedicated to the owner, not so much the contractor type stuff. So there's other ways of I won't say they're better, but there's other ways of doing it. But the issues you've talked about with the building, the extended length of time for closeout, I hate to say it, but I've got jobs that go a year over all day long to complete, and then another year to get all the paperwork in. It's so common, it's disgusting. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Juskiewicz, do you want to continue at this time?
I see the
Great.
superintendent has his hand up.
Superintendent Hartling?
Yeah, good evening. Thanks, Steve, as always. And I want to be very careful how I word this. I have my own opinion about the performance of O&G based on the last 4 years of experience with them, and I'll hold that in reservation for a later meeting. But I do want to make it very clear that while there was an allocation so that our facilities team could hire somebody to manage our internal employees, the fact that we didn't fill an extra position is reflective of the fact that we structured internally to support our team members. So we didn't hire somebody extra to manage the internal custodians or maintenance people. So that had no bearing on kind of the workflow. The reality is Mr. Donaldson has put in hundreds and hundreds of hours chasing behind O&G, essentially trying to hold them accountable for the performance that was supposed to happen. I applaud him for continuing to stay with it. The fact that we chose not to hire somebody else to manage our maintenance and custodial team was really a choice about how best to manage our internal staff, and it had zero impact on Wayne or Sam's ability to roll forward and try to hold the contractor accountable, which was has been a futile effort. The second thing I'd say is that while Sam Kilpatrick transitioned out, him and Wayne overlapped by many, many weeks, and Sam, as a Ledyard son, if you will, continued to be a trusted confidant with Mr. Donaldson. And so I would also say that other than the contractor trying to use that as an excuse, it didn't impact the ability of us to try to hold them accountable. And so, I'm appalled by what has gone on, quite frankly. And I appreciate the hard work of PMBC, but the idea of them assuming risk has not flown out very well for us. And, I just point out, I do agree that HVAC is always a nightmare. Certifying a system and then finding out components don't exist, and multiple system failures and those issues after 2 years is incorrigible. And then the last thing I just note, I do agree with Mr. Juskiewicz about substantial completion and then closing out a project. There is a timeline difference in that. The reality is this community paid money every month as we saw very little to no progress. And I would just point out that was months and months and months before COVID hit, and contractors were still permitted to be working and have unfettered access, quite frankly. I'll stop there, and I look forward to further conversations in another format, but I just wanted to point out those pieces around, our team and Wayne and Sam and their hard work trying to keep things so that our community was treated fairly.
Thank you, Mr. Hartling. Mr. Juskiewicz, would you like to proceed at this point?
Yeah, and I just want to mention with what the superintendent just said. By no means was I saying that anything was dropped the ball when that transfer took place. What it becomes one of, though, is that again, it could be on the construction manager side where when something was asked for by one person, but the other person didn't know they asked for it, so they were not going to follow up on it. We did have a lot of discussions at the PMBC, and this goes back, we've changed out quite a few members with that, as to the decision whether to hire someone or not. We had those discussions. We brought the architect in as a third party to help us with that decision. because we didn't want the construction manager at risk to be involved in that decision. So the architect would be considered, they're an independent third party in helping us make that decision. We went round and round, and when that decision was made to be able to allocate the money, we thought at the time that was in the best interest of a town, rather than spend what we estimated at the time would be about $600,000 to have someone available through that moving through. But I do agree with the superintendent that over the past, some of these project problems have just gone on for too long without being addressed, or they were addressed and not addressed properly. So, but I do want to point out that we are talking about a relatively small amount of a very, very large project. And in the case of retrofitting air conditioning into a 9-10 foot ceiling school was extremely challenging, and we might have looked at doing it differently, looking back on how hard that actually was. So with that, if there are no other further questions, I'd like Marcia Hancock to talk quickly about a project debt. And again, I do want to point out that we really don't have a horizon for when the state will close the projects out. And there is going to be a variance on what they allow in change orders. And there's a thing called the unallowables and what's eligible or ineligible list. And while we have a pretty good feel for what the state considered ineligible, until you actually submit your finals, the state can move that line a little bit left and right. So Marcia, if you're available.
Yes, I'm right here. Thank you, Steve. I'll just go over these next 3 slides rather quickly. This first slide shows the first 3 lines are what we have, well, the first 2 lines are what we have actually paid out in interest on our short-term debt, otherwise known as bond anticipation notes. So we shorten that by calling those bands. And the 1.2 million is what we have spent to date on interest for the short-term borrowing. The next line is the total debt issuance costs paid to date. Every time we go out to either ban or bond, we pay issuance costs to the financial advisor, the bond counsel. We have documents that we have to make up and have those printed and have them digitized for the bond and short-term note markets. So we pay all those. A bond issuance is usually about 75,000 all told, and a ban issuance is about 30,000. So we've had several of both of those. Excuse me, the third line is what we will be paying in May on our current 1-year short-term notes in interest. And then the next 3 lines are projections of issuance costs and 1 more interest payment on bands that we will be selling this May. In May, we will be also issuing bonds for what may be the last part of the town portion of funding, but we won't know for sure on what the rest of the town funding will be until we know what those ineligibles are that Steve was referring to. This is based on the 62.8% reimbursement rate. So the next slide shows what we have received so far from the state and bonds that the town has sold. So the state reimbursement so far is almost 27 million. That's based on what we think is the full amount that we will be receiving, minus or not including the 11% holdback amount that the state will not give us until the projects are both audited. And as Steve said, that could be anywhere between 6 months and 6 years. If you will remember, at one point, the state legislature passed a, as part of their budget resolution, when they went from 5% holdback to 11% holdback, part of the carrot to municipalities that were dealing with school construction projects were that, yes, we're going to increase your holdback from 5 to 11%, but we will also make sure we're dictating that every project has to be audited within 6 months of the completion of the projects. As Steve said, that is not happening anywhere else in the state on any of the projects. So we're left holding that 11% holdback, which is about, that is about $11 million, which we'll see in the final slide. So don't go to the final slide yet though, Rox. We've received the 26.9 million. We have bonded 21 million. In May, we will be bonding another 4 million. You might ask, why don't we just bond the whole thing right now? We can't do that because if we over bond, if we over issue bonds, there's no way to get that back. Bond counsel would never even let us get to that point. We have to prove every step along the way as we issue new bonds that that money is not going to be replaced by state money. If at some time that money could be replaced by state money, we just will not be allowed to bond it at that point. So that's why we have to wait to see what the state is going to consider ineligible, how much of the 11 million that we think the state still owes us will actually be decreased by those ineligibles, and then we can bond the final amount. So if we go to the final slide of the 3, we see the 48 million we already have, the 11 million that the state technically still owes us, and the 4 million that the town is bonding in May. The first asterisk there shows that the state number will be reduced by the total ineligibles as determined by the state. And then the next section, so our total funding should be 63,500,600,000 by the time we're done. The total project budget for both projects, which is how I think about it, not like how the state thinks about it. So I think of the total referendum approved amount. The next line, 61,655,000, is Steve's estimate of the total construction costs and soft costs, everything excluding debt. And then the total projected debt is the next line. So we're projecting a surplus at this point of 1.7 million, but that assumes, if you look at the second asterisk, that the state grant reimbursements will be completed by June of 22. That would only happen if they get the audits done rather quickly. So we will need to continue selling bond anticipation notes to basically fund the state's portion until at least until we know what the ineligibles are. And I don't know how that works, Steve, maybe you can speak to that. If we get to a point where we know what the ineligibles are and we're pretty sure that, let's say the state portion is 9 million instead of 11.5 or 11.3, we could conceivably bond that difference at that point and then just ban the portion that we know the state is going to give us, or that we're pretty sure the state is going to give us. And I would just, as a last comment about the original estimates, I based those estimates on the project being done in 2 years. So this being the first really big project I was involved in, I didn't account for the gap between sufficient completion to be able to operate in those buildings and the actual project closeouts. But we still would have had the issue of not being able to bond what we didn't know we owed yet at that point without knowing the state ineligibles. And then we also thought when we started this that we were at 5% holdback by the state. It was changed to 11. And then when we saw the legislation that they had 6 months to finish an audit. We didn't really think we would be in much trouble interest-wise. That I think we can thank the state for. It's nice that we're getting these reimbursements, but sometimes that's a double-edged sword. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about the, when we bond, just so we can review this very, very briefly. The 21 million that that the town has bonded, the interest on that money immediately, as soon as it's bonded, we start paying out of the general fund. So when we talk about interest payments here, we're only talking about the interest on the short-term loans. So we at least have 21 million of the project that is put to bed and being financed through the general fund. Also, I would point out that when we do a bond issue, we usually get a bond premium that comes to the town, and it's that money is put into the mill rate stabilization fund to help ease the bump up in expenditures for those bonds that are now being paid for out of the general fund. So there was about 2.5 million that came in premiums that you could say is part of, not of the surplus, because it's not a budget surplus, but it is an increase in revenue that some towns may have put that towards the interest costs of the short-term notes. Other towns would have done what we're doing, which is trying to, over the long run, mitigate the mill rate increases due to the bonding of the projects.
Thank you, Marcia. Just very quickly, are there any town councilors that have any questions for Marcia? And then we will have to move on to our regular meeting. Any councilors? Hearing none, thank you again. Oh, Steve.
Linda, I got a few more because I need an answer on something from the town council.
Okay.
All right, next slide. I'm not going to go through the lessons learned. We'll talk about those at a future meeting. Next
Yes,
slide.
thank you.
Just quickly on the track and field, in case any of you haven't been out there, looks great. Next slide.
Breaking up.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Next slide. You'll see on the track and field pre-construction estimate and final cost. At this point, we have about $104,000 remaining in what was total authorized to the PMBC. We had no significant issues during the execution, so the contingency money is largely intact. Next slide. There were several add alternates in the project that we did not accept at the beginning. There was one that had to be made within 1 day to have it put in the project the last minute. We felt really good about where we were at money at that point because basically the field was all in. We were able to add kernels into the end zones at basically about 2 hours before the cutoff to add that in. It really makes a huge difference in how things look, and we've been thanked for that. Next slide. All right, 2 items that were add alternates in the original proposal. We did not accept them at award because we wanted to make sure. I remember a discussion with Councilor Dombrowski about you better finish it within the money you have because you ain't getting any more. That was the fencing along Gallop Hill Road and the high school, the new field multi-sport scoreboard. So I'm going to talk to you about 2 of these things. We were recommending do this work in spring of 2021. I spoke with the chairman of the town council, Chairman Davis. She said, hey, let us know what you want to do. Let's let the council take a look at it because we had no idea with COVID and everything how money was going to turn out this year in the town budget. The bids we had on this are stale, but they do frame the project costs, and we're working to get some new bids on this now. New quotes, rather, is a better term. Next slide. All right, so on the scoreboard, just to let you know, the scoreboard that's there now is a football scoreboard. We just spent over $2 million to put in a new field that'll allow the high school to have soccer, lacrosse, and others. So having a scoreboard that is multi-sport that you can change out and use for different things would be very beneficial. There's a rendering on the right. Actually, the price we have does not include the little, the L at the top, but the existing scoreboard still has useful life. Parks and Rec has indicated that they would like to take that scoreboard and repurpose it on another place in town. We had 2 quotes. One was at 56,000, one was at 43,000. They're different products, so you have to kind of look at the two. And the low bid we had at the time did include the cost of relocating the existing scoreboard. So what we would like to do is, and I'll get an answer at the end of both parts of this, is we're looking for town council concurrence to move forward within the money that we have for the scoreboard and fencing. And I'll talk to you about the fencing next. Next slide. This is a picture I just took the other day. This is along Gallop Hill Road before it makes the turn. You'll see that the fence that runs around the back of the high school is in disrepair. It's rusty. The gates, they're still functional, but it really is an eyesore as you go down along there. We did get a cost in the original contract for this, but again, we're looking at the cost of that project and it was not put into the project at the time. Next slide. So the fencing along there, we had 2 quotes. We've got new quotes coming in. They're going to be higher than this, but we had a quote for 34,700, one for 33,000. And then we had the original quote back in the from the contractor that's doing the field. There's some options in there about removing the old fencing and whether it would be chain link metal or vinyl fence, vinyl coated chain link, and whether we would go all the way to the end of the property or just around the to where the entrance is. I will tell you that we got some more quotes coming in that are a little bit higher. And we think we could save some money by Board of Ed facilities and Public Works personnel taking care of the removal of the old fencing as opposed to paying the contractor to do that. We'd like to try to save some money there. And I will point out several times in the school projects and other we've used that combination of Board of Ed facilities and Public Works to and Parks and Rec in some cases to help defray costs. So what we're looking at here is town council concurrence within the money that we have been allocated to move forward with that fence replacement and a new scoreboard. So I'll stop talking, and if you have any questions on that, Chairman Davis, I'm not sure how you would handle that as a vote or.
So I'm going to refer it to finance and ask Mr. Soms, can you get this on the agenda quickly? And Mr. Juskiewicz, could you update any information you have that comes in between now and his finance committee meeting?
All right, we'll do that.
Very good. And that's where we will be having a future, more of a workshop style meeting to discuss lessons learned, etc. For now, I will just end it with thank you very much, Steve, to yourself and to your committee for the time you spent on this as volunteers. I always want to mention that you are volunteers. So when Mr. Washington talks about his frustrations with his projects, at least he's being paid. So I thank you, Mr. Juskiewicz. Sorry, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. And I believe that my salary is the same as yours as the chairman of a town council.
This is true. As it is all of us here. So we thank all of our volunteers. And with that, we will move forward onto our agenda. And I will ask, let's see, are there any resident and property owners who wish to speak? And I will limit you to 3 minutes each. And I know Mr. Hosey is first. His address for the record, Roxanne, is 2 Lucian Way in Ledger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of just quick questions. Thank you, Mr. Juskiewicz, for the informative presentation. One question that came up as I was looking at it on the finance question was, I understand the state is holding back 11%, but it showed in the slides that that was amounting to a little over $11 million. How did 11% of a $64 million project become $11 million? Is there some other money in there that isn't quite clear to me? And the other question I had, we've all heard the many things that have been said about O&G, reading meeting minutes and so forth for the past year. You'll see terms like non-responsive and even derelict. What is our current situation with ONG? Are they at the table with us now working on this? If not, how do we intend to get them back to the table? And ultimately, the bottom line question, when do we expect the projects to be genuinely complete, as in the punch lists are down to 0 or down to nearly 0 nuisance items like some knucklehead glued a hard hat to the ceiling kind of stuff?
So question number 1 is if Marcia is still here. Is she still here?
Yes, I am.
Could you answer that question? Question number 2, we're not going to deal with right now. We could deal with at the workshop. And then question number 3, I will let Mr. Juskiewicz answer. But Marcia, could you answer the question about the financing?
Yes, I would answer it by saying that I have a spreadsheet that I do not have in front of me right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay. Linda, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, who is this?
Roxanne.
It's Roxanne. I had to redial in because everyone was breaking up.
Okay, yes, we can hear you, Roxanne. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, Marcia,
sorry.
it's all right.
So I would say that I need to review the spreadsheet, and I would be happy to share that at a future time.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Steve?
Just quickly here, we meet with ONG. ONG is on site and in communication every single day with Wayne and or me back and forth. So they're as far as responsive, that doesn't mean that they're maybe that term is not being used correctly. It's not that they're not responding. It's just that with respect, when someone is saying something like ONG is not being responsive, keep in mind that there's a third tier communication going there to a trade to come back into the school. So ONG does not self-perform on this contract. They're a construction manager at risk. So they're going out to a third-party trade and coming in. I would estimate that, we're essentially there on the middle school. There's a few things here and there. Our roof leak's going to develop over time and have to be addressed by warranty. Yeah, that's not punch list item stuff though. So I think we're pretty much there on the middle school. There's a few nuisance items, but in some cases, things have to be ordered, and parts are in supply. As you know, there's, if you're waiting for a specific part, you have to wait for that part. I don't think I think there was 2 words you used. One was non-responsive. The other was, I wasn't sure if it was derelict. I don't think that
Derelict was the term I used, and I took that from meeting minutes. That's not my word.
Right. And again, I don't have complete control over what every member says at every meeting. And I would not characterize it with that term myself by any means. And again, the Gallup Hill School has been more challenging, partially because of a design there. But something to keep in mind here is that as we've gone through this project, and we've had plenty of discussions on this, and I don't want to turn this into a lecture on how these projects are managed, but saving the town money by working with the trades to keep the cost of change orders and things down. Actually, when those things happen, ONG got paid less money because their fee is a function of cost in some places. And when we didn't spend that contingency money throughout the project, all that was fee, I believe at 8%, that ONG did not reap. So while we had some additional costs as a result of the length of the projects in the architectural side, on the ONG side, when there's delays in construction, it's considered to be, I'm going to use the term quote, at their fault. So they can't charge us more for that unless it's work we're asking them to do specifically outside the original scope. In the case of the architect, on the other hand, though, that is outside the architect's control. So the architect can charge us some additional money for construction management. And we've been doing that on a time and materials basis, so it hasn't cost the town that much. I'm sorry, I hope I answered that question.
Thank you, Mr. Juskiewicz. We are going to reserve any other comments for when we have that future meeting. And we will check with you as far as your schedule and everyone else involved schedule. Mr. Solms will take up the matter in his committee of the additional costs. And at this time, I will ask if there are any other residents or property owners who would like to make comments at this time. Comments, but not questions. We're moving from questions at this point. Hearing none. Are there any, I don't see any, well, are there any committee, commission, or board reports? I don't see any committees here. Comments of town councilors at this time. Any comments from town councilors? Hearing none, to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February 24th.
Councilor Dombrowski, I move the motion.
Second, Councilor Washington.
Motion's made and seconded. Any comments, corrections, additions? Hearing none, Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Sebelia,
Yes.
Mr. Soms,
Yes.
Mr. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes,
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ingles,
Yes.
Mr. Marshall. I know he was here. Mrs. McGrattan. She's muted. She said yes. Okay, I think John still was, I'll say 8 in favor, 0 opposed.
thank you. Let's see, you have your communications list. I did one referral this evening. And now we'll move on to committee reports, admin, Mrs. McGrattan.
Okay, the administration committee met earlier this evening. We made 5 recommendations for reappointments to the WPCA. They are on the council agenda. We also approved proposed amendments to the ordinance number 100-018, an ordinance providing for archery hunting on certain town-owned lands and certain open space properties. And we also recommended a public hearing date in April for that. That's all.
Linda, we can't hear you.
Linda's muted.
Community relations, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, Councilor Davis. The most important thing that we have going on right now is we have a public forum coming up on April 7th with the social services and youth services group. As that case, we'll have the chair, Lisa Doozy-Smith, will be there to talk about social services, and Katie Sikorsky-Maynard will be there for youth services. She's a youth services coordinator, and the whole goal of this public forum is to kind of inform the general public of all the different services the town has on the social services. And there's a lot of great things. Kate had come forth on the, from the March 3rd date and presented an idea of what she was going to be talking about, which was a lot of information. It was really good stuff. And at the next meeting on the 17th of March, Chair Lisa Doozy-Smith is going to come forward and talk about some of the things she may talk about. There's a little bit of overlap between the two, but I think it's going to be something really good. We want to get the word out to everybody that on the 6:30 for April 7th public forum, please attend, spread the word. It's going to be a great opportunity for people to learn about services that are readily available and very helpful within the town of Ledyard. That's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. We'll make sure we get some publicity out on that because it would be nice to have members of the community here. So thank you for doing that. Any questions for community relations? Finance, Mr. Soms.
Town Council Finance Committee held its regular meeting last Wednesday, March 3rd, 5. Colleen Lauer, Director of the Ledyard Housing Authority, addressed the committee regarding new requirements from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority regarding the grant they expect to receive to upgrade and maintain the facility. Ms. Lauer reminded the committee that the authority applied for and received $1.5 million from the Department of Housing and an additional $1.3 million from CHFA, totaling $2.8 million to upgrade and provide improvements at the facility. However, because the grant award letters have not been issued and because of the extra CHFA money, more pre-development work is required, including hazmat tests and radon testing. And those requirements have caused services such as architect fees to increase from $37,000 to $99,000. And because the Housing Authority needs to pay for the pre-development work up front, and they don't have the money to do so, they are working with Mr. Kent Lewis on a 2020 grant application process and to obtain a bridge loan so they can pay for the pre-development work. So the committee asked Ms. Lauer to meet with the mayor and the finance director regarding the town's process for grant spending and reimbursement. And everything else is on our agenda for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soms, and thank you for your good work on the budget workshops. It was interesting to do them hybrid. I had hoped that by doing them that way, we would have a huge contingency from the public there. And man, if one person complains they didn't know what's going on, I'm going to be real disappointed, because boy, it couldn't have been easier to follow this year. I understand in the past it was difficult because, you know, you had to come out to a meeting, three meetings lasting 15 hours. But now you could do it right from home. You could eat munchies while you're watching the meeting and stay on mute while you chomp your Cheetos.
Wear pajamas.
Yeah, but all kidding aside, I have to say I was disappointed. I tried to get the word out, but I think we had one member of the public there. So, but thank you for your hard work, because I know you're in your foot situation keeps you at home, but you wouldn't have known you were at home. It went really well, except for the one issue we had, but it went really
We
well.
had some other people attend, yeah.
That's right, we did. We had all those people from overseas as part of our meeting. So at any rate, I just wanted to give you special thanks for that.
Thank you, thank you.
Land use, Mr. Dombrowski.
Land use met last week. We moved forward the ordinance that Mary had spoke about at admin for the archery hunting on town-owned land revision, and also we moved to finance a proposed lease on the Clark Farm for farming use.
Thank you. Any questions for land use? Liaison reports, any liaison reports? No reports. This brings us to the mayor's report. Mayor Allen.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see everybody tonight. Update from the Senate. They did approve the hyperscale data centers. This was something that we had talked about last year. There's been some interest in at least one parcel in town for that over off of Route 2 near Foxwoods. So that will be moving. That will require, if and when that gets to a level of fruition, that will require council approval for a municipal fee agreement in lieu of taxes. So be prepared for that as we move ahead with that, and we'll have to negotiate that. Also attended a CCM legislative meeting on the 4th. There was an interesting discussion about $100 billion, that was with a B, high-speed train proposal to go from New York City to Boston and under the Long Island Sound. But more important and germane to our discussions, there was discussion about a three-tier change to the pilot payments. So towns that have more state or non-taxable lands will have a higher pilot payout than towns that have less. There's also a municipal property tax cap that's being discussed yet again. This was something that came up last year. It seems to be gaining a little bit of support. We need to stay close to that. And one, I will keep my fingers crossed, one, which would be actually relief from an unfunded mandate, which is it would remove their current requirement, which is if a tenant is evicted from a residence in Ledyard, it requires the town of Ledyard to store their effects. And I believe it's for a period of 90 days. At which point we can dispose of them. But the bill that's being proposed would actually relieve us from having to take that on. I think it actually just passes it to the landlord, but it's off our shoulders nonetheless. As you know, the budget was submitted on March 1st. It includes a 0.65 mil decrease in the mill rate. As you know, this was a revaluation year, so values went up substantially. So I am very careful not to call it a tax decrease, because some taxpayers will actually see a tax increase in this budget. Some will see no increase at all, and others will, in fact, see a tax decrease. So that there's more to come on that. And I would also say that there is, I think the 0.65 number may grow more closer to a mil or more because there was an underrepresented revenue stream in the budget. So I think we'll hear more about that tomorrow. But it does include things that we feel are important. It includes the second highest payment to road restoration in the last 5 years, and last year was the highest. It includes a contribution to capital that was, again, the second highest in the last 5 years, second only to last year. It funds 94% of our capital needs, including some important school functions, which are the high school stage, the high school curtains, the lights and sound stage for the auditorium. It includes the last bank of bathrooms for Ledyard High School, the repairs and renovations to those. It includes another bank of classrooms at Ledyard High School to get renovated. Really impressive what they've been able to do, and that will continue. It also includes all the funding that we normally see for our heavy equipment. So, and we still have 1.5 million in the mill rate stabilization fund. So that's important too, because the idea behind that is if you look at the ups and downs of state budgeting as the edge of a saw, the idea with the mill rate stabilization fund is that it turns that saw blade basically into a butter knife, and it smooths everything out. And that's kind of what we need it for, because at some point in the not too distant future, that'll be needed. Also wanted to let you know that Ryan Foster, Ledyard police officer, was promoted to sergeant on March 2nd. There were several that were up for the promotion, and Sergeant Foster did very well, and congratulations to him. As recently as today, our winter operation budget is actually still intact. So I know Public Works Director Maslin came to you. Hopefully the late spring or early spring winter weather will stay away, because as of right now, we're not overspent. So we're right on track, which is good. Also wanted to share with you, I know everybody knows that I've been working on moving the food pantry to the former Ledyard Center School. That is no more. I have expended all of my patience negotiating with the landlord, and I finally put an ultimatum down on the table with a 5 p.m. last Friday deadline. And I didn't get a response, and I didn't get a signed lease. So we moved on to one of our other 4 options that we had, which was the former Morgan Barn, or it is the Morgan Barn at the Lower Town Green. That seems to be moving along quite well. It does require an 824 review for planning and zoning, and that has been forwarded to P&Z for an 824 review. So that's actually on their agenda coming up. As Marcia alluded to, we have a bond rating call. We actually are selling bonds in May, but we have the rating call with Standard & Poor's first week of April. So we're going to be preparing for that presentation, again, trying to shed the best light on the town of Ledyard and how we are running our finances so that we can get good, favorable rates and hopefully many bidders again on our bonds. We've done well in the past, and we want that to continue. Another interesting tidbit was today, CCM reached out to us, that's the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, regarding the American Rescue Act, which was passed today. The president is expected to sign it on Friday. And what it amounts to is about $2.9 million of direct funding to the town of Ledyard. So I combed through the various documents today. It requires us to spend the money by December 31st, 2024. It is broken up into 2 disbursements, one around the 1st of July of this year, which would be the beginning of our next fiscal year, and the second payment exactly a year later. There is separate levels of funding for schools. So the 2.9 million that's coming to the town of Ledyard is not in regards to Ledyard schooling. And the uses, it's very specific, but the uses are for economic impacts to residents, small businesses, nonprofits, or industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. The other one that's important to note is it also includes, it can be used for investments in public water, public sewer, or broadband expansions. So I have somewhat of a bold idea for that if and when we get there. You cannot use it to offset any tax increases, and you cannot use it to fund pension obligations. We don't have either of those problems, so that's probably really good news. On the COVID update, we only had 5 new cases in the last 10 days, which is great. Hospitalizations as of 3 p.m. today are 5 at L&M and 5 at Bacchus, none of which are in intensive care, which is really good. And then closer to home, 86% of the Ledyard population age 75 plus has received at least their first dose, and 62.4% of our 65 to 74-year-olds have received at least their first dose. And then the other piece I wanted to share with you, there are mass vaccination sites at both Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods at the Rainmaker entrance, I believe it is, for Foxwoods. That's the one that is geared towards Ledgelight Health District, which is Ledyard. So when those start ramping up more, when they start adding more age groups, I'll make everybody aware of that. Also, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you've probably heard on TV, you'll hear something like it's 67.6% effective. That number is actually a worldwide effective number, but in the United States, it's more than 82% effective. And it's essentially 100% effective at keeping people out of the hospital. So if the single dose is around and available, the point that was made today by both Hartford Healthcare and Yale New Haven is don't shop for a vaccine, take whichever one is available. All 3 are good, all 3 are effective. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank the towns of North Stonington, Stonington, East Great Plain, and Norwich and Preston as well. Today there was what was called in 911 as a small pile of leaves burning, and it turned into more than a 2-acre fire. So it was a area that is not fire hydranted, and it obviously required a lot of tankers. And so those 4 towns in particular came out in force and really helped us out and helped us knock down a fire that grew very quickly, and it burned 2 acres off of Avery Hill Road. So sorry to hear that happen, but I'm also very thankful that if there's a regionalization effort, the fire departments know how to pull it off, and I thank them for what they did today. That's all I have for you.
Thank you, Mayor. Does anybody have any questions of the mayor? Councilor Ingalls.
Mayor, were there any structures damaged in the fire?
No, thankfully it did not approach the structure. I believe that there is a residence on the property, and this is right towards the beginning of Avery Hill Road over near the Avalonia property, but it was private property, but no structures were burned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of the mayor? Hearing none. We have no old business. Would anybody like to amend the agenda under new business? Kevin, we're not going to amend the agenda under new business to add any items. Moving on to admin.
I make a motion to reappoint the following members to the Water Pollution Control Authority for a 3-year term ending April the 11th, 2024. Monir Tufik, 33 Seabury Avenue, Ledyard, as a regular member. Sharon Wadecki, Democrat, 44 Fanning Road, Ledyard, a regular member. Edmund Lynch, Democrat, 11 Redbrook Lane, Ledyard, regular member. J.A. Capon, Democrat, 37 Silas Dean Road, alternate member, and James Ball, Democrat, 674R, Schuylkill Road, Legend, regular member.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. I would just like to say I cannot thank these folks enough. Really appreciate their service. It's, everybody knows how much I disliked it when the town council served as the WPCA committee. And I thank them all for serving. Mary, did you have any other comments on this group?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Psalms,
He's muted.
Yes.
Mr. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Engel,
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan,
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia. I think you're muted. He says yes. 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. Let's see, finance, next item.
This is Councilor Solms. I move to authorize Ledyard Fire Company to overexpend account number 101-20501-54300, repairs and maintenance by $13,647 and to transfer funds at year end to make the account whole.
Second.
Discussion.
So this amount is coincidentally similar to the amount that we authorized Gales Ferry to make, but it's for a different piece of equipment. This equipment is the Green Goblin, also known as R12, and they had to replace tires and brakes, neither of which should be left unattended, and in the process discovered a cracked wheel, so they had to replace the wheel as well. The Finance Committee had some questions about process, given that there should be a normal process where you apply for the motion to overexpend and then kind of purchase order and do the work. This was done in reverse. The chief understands that that's the process going forward. We also talked about how we might recover some of these funds because the Green Goblin has been a real gift to the fire company and to Ledyard, but it will soon become excess as the what is it? I can never remember all the numbers. R17, whatever it is, where we're putting a Cummins engine in. That engine is R11. That engine is in the vehicle, is getting ready. I saw a picture. It looks great. So we are hoping we can sell. I don't think we'll get 13,000 for it. We only paid 9, but we would like to sell the Green Goblin primarily so that we don't incur any more expenses keeping it alive. Again, it's been a great truck, and we're lucky to have had it. So Steve Holyfield has been patiently reclining in front of the ocean, and he's here to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from town councilors? Hearing none. Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Engel,
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan,
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia. He says yes. 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. Next item. Mr. Dombrowski, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Make a motion to set a virtual video conference public hearing to be held on Wednesday, March 24th, 2021 at 6:30 PM to receive comments and recommendations regarding a proposed lease amendment agreement between the town of Ledyard and Mr. Walter Major to increase the term of the lease to 5 years for the purpose of farming a portion of the Clark Farm property located at 1025 Colonel Ledyard Highway, Route 117, former state property in accordance with CGS 07 Tech 163E.
Is there a second? please? Motion's been made
Second.
and seconded by, I think it was Mrs. Ingalls, correct?
Yes.
Discussion.
This is just setting the public hearing date.
Yes.
And we also we need to correct it's not the former state property. So we can keep the 117, but
that's
remove
right.
the former state property.
Correct.
Yeah, I took that out. Is
Okay,
it still showing
thank you.
portal?
Yeah, it is. Yep,
Okay, I thought I took it out. I don't know why it's still there.
you probably did. Yeah.
Okay, Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Davis,
Here. Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Mr. Marshall's not here. Mrs. McGrattan,
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia,
Yes.
Mr. Soms. Oh, yay.
Still here. Yes.
Okay, 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. We have no other work or discussion items. If somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Excuse me,
Yes,
this is Councilor Washington. I wanted to double back really quick on the budget.
yes.
As one person who wasn't able to attend, it is on video. So if you want to watch it,
Good.
there's
Very
no
ex-
excuse at all.
Yes, very excellent point, and I will promote that. Very excellent point. However, the Zoom bombing will not be available for public viewing. Although we could probably get a lot of people to watch if we mentioned that, but
Yeah. We're gonna do the number crunch again on Thursday.
that's tomorrow. That's
Thank-
right.
Finance Department, they were able to edit that part out and put the 2 videos together so that it,
Oh, that's
Seamless.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
Good to hear. So we'll see many of you tomorrow. Hope others will join us. And with that, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn from Mr. Dombrowski.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion's made.
Second.
And seconded. This meeting is adjourned without exception. Night all. Do you know
Good
that
night,
everyone. Good night.
everyone.
next time we meet, it'll be light later?
Yes.
Yes.
Good
Unless
night.
it's
Daylight.
tomorrow.
yeah,